There is a moment, just before impact, when the body knows something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. For an 18-year-old named Ricardo Isaacson dos Santos Leite, that moment came on a summer afternoon in the year 2000, in the shallow end of a hotel swimming pool. He dove in the way thousands of teenagers do every day without a second thought, but the water was too shallow. His body struck the bottom, and somewhere between the surface and the concrete beneath it, his spine took the force meant for open water. He would later be known to the world simply as Kaká. But before the Ballon d'Or, before the Champions League trophies, before 80,000 fans chanted his name, there was a boy lying still in a hospital bed, and a diagnosis that threatened to end everything before it had truly begun. This is that story. Kaká was not born into the kind of poverty that so many football legends rise from. His father was a civil engineer, his mother a teacher. He grew up in Brasilia in a stable, middle-class home, the kind of upbringing that rarely produces football superstars, because football superstars are so often forged in scarcity. But talent doesn't check its surroundings before it appears, and Kaká had it unmistakably from an early age. By his teenage years, he had entered the youth academy of São Paulo FC, one of Brazil's most storied clubs. Coaches noticed his vision first, the way he seemed to see passes other players couldn't. Then they noticed his composure, a stillness under pressure that most players twice his age hadn't mastered. He was quiet, disciplined, devoutly religious even as a boy, and entirely serious about the game. Everyone around him agreed on one thing. This kid was going somewhere. Then came the pool. The accident fractured a vertebra in his spine. In an instant, the trajectory of a promising young footballer collided with a far darker possibility, one that had nothing to do with football at all. Would he walk again? That was the first question. Not would he play? Not would he recover his form? Simply, would he walk? Doctors examining the injury understood how close it had come to catastrophe. A few centimeters, a slightly different angle of impact. Either one could have meant permanent paralysis. Instead, Kaká had escaped the worst possible outcome. But escaped is a strange word to use for a body that could no longer be trusted to do what it once did without thought. For months, his life narrowed to a single question. Could his body be rebuilt? There were no highlight reels during this stretch. No crowds, no cameras. Just rehabilitation. The slow, unglamorous work of retraining a body that had been broken and was now being coaxed painstakingly back toward wholeness. Every session was a negotiation between fear and hope. Every small movement regained was a private victory nobody outside his family would ever see. He has spoken openly in the years since about how his faith carried him through this period, that he viewed his survival and recovery not as luck, but as something larger than himself. Whatever one believes about that claim, one fact is undeniable. The boy who walked out of that recovery was not the same boy who dove into that pool. Here is where the story could have ended. So many careers do end this way. A devastating injury at a critical, formative age, and a promising athlete who simply never plays again. The sport is full of ghosts like that. Names that were supposed to mean something, extinguished before they had the chance. Would Kaká become one of them? He did not. In 2001, less than a year after the accident that nearly ended everything, Kaká made his professional debut for São Paulo FC. It was not a triumphant return marked by fireworks. It was quieter than that. A young man simply stepping back onto a pitch that had almost been taken from him forever, and beginning again to play. But almost immediately it became clear that something remarkable had survived the fall. The vision was still there. The composure was still there. If anything, the discipline forged in those grinding months of rehabilitation had sharpened him. By 2002, at just 20 years old, Kaká was named to Brazil's World Cup squad, the team that would go on to win the tournament that year in Japan and South Korea, Brazil's 5th world title. He played only a handful of minutes in that tournament. He was young, and Brazil's attacking talent was deep, but he had a winner's medal. And more importantly, he had proof, to himself, if to no one else, that the accident had not written the final chapter of his career, merely delayed the first one. In 2003, Kaká left Brazil for AC Milan, one of the most storied clubs in world football. It was a significant transfer for a player still establishing himself on the world stage, and Milan's coaching staff had clear expectations. This young Brazilian was meant to become a central figure in their midfield. He didn't just meet those expectations, he redefined them. Playing in a Milan side stacked with veterans and internationals, Kaká became indispensable almost immediately, gliding through midfields with the ball at his feet, delivering the kind of forward runs that turned defense into attack in a matter of seconds. In his very first season, Milan won the Serie A title. The following year, he helped carry the club to the Champions League final, but it was 2007 that would define him. That year, AC Milan returned to the Champions League final, a rematch against Liverpool, the club that had beaten them 2 years earlier in one of the most dramatic finals in the competition's history. This time, Milan would not be denied. Kaká was named man of the match in the semi-final against Manchester United, and Milan lifted the trophy that May in Athens. Weeks later, the football world made it official. Kaká was named FIFA World Player of the Year. He won the Ballon d'Or, European football's highest individual honor, becoming just the 4th Brazilian in history to claim it. Picture the full arc of it. A teenager lying in a hospital bed, uncertain if he would walk. And less than 7 years later, that same young man stood on a stage in Europe, holding the sport's most prestigious individual trophy, recognized as the finest footballer alive. Would anyone watching that pool accident in 2000 have believed this was where the story led? No story like this comes without complication, and Kaká's did not end simply in triumph. In 2009, Real Madrid signed him for a fee that, at the time, made him one of the most expensive players in football history. It should have been the crowning move of his career. Instead, his years in Madrid were shadowed by recurring injuries, a cruel echo of the very vulnerability that had first threatened his career as a teenager. His body, rebuilt once through sheer will and rehabilitation, now struggled to sustain the physical demands of the highest level of the sport, season after season. He never fully recaptured the dominant form he'd shown at Milan. There were flashes of brilliance, moments that reminded the world of what he'd once been. But the peak years of Kaká's career, in hindsight, belong almost entirely to that stretch in Italy, the years immediately following his recovery, when a young man played as though he had something to prove to no one but himself. He continued playing for several more years, a return to Milan, a move to the United States with Orlando City, representing Brazil at multiple World Cups along the way, before retiring in 2017. Kaká's career is not simply a story about talent. Talent on its own explains very little. What his story actually reveals is this: the difference between a career that ends in a hospital bed and one that ends with a trophy in hand is very often the discipline nobody sees, the months of rehabilitation with no audience, the quiet returns with no fanfare, the willingness to rebuild something that has been broken without any guarantee it will ever work again. Setbacks do not ask permission before they arrive. They rarely come at a convenient time, and they almost never announce themselves in advance. The only real choice left to anyone facing one is not whether the setback happens, it already has, but what they do with the months that follow it when no one is watching and there is no proof yet that the effort will pay off. Kaká could not control the depth of that pool, but he controlled everything that came after. That's the part of the story worth carrying with you. If you enjoyed this one, drop a comment and let us know which legend story you want told next, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.